Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Glam Reaper podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Muldowney, aka the Glam Reaper. On today's episode, we are talking all things mental health with CANA's Barbara Kemmis. Take it away. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Glam Reaper podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Muldowney, and I have one of my favorite people to bump into at the conventions, Barbara Kemmis. Is the right way of pronouncing it?
Yes.
Kemmis? Okay, perfect. Always as an Irish person, I always have to make sure I get that perfectly clear. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. So glad to be with you.
Tell us a little, tell the audience a little bit about who you are, where you're from. You're in the US, but yeah, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. I'm talking to you from Chicago, Illinois. The headquarters of the Cremation Association of North America is in suburban Chicago, and I'm the executive director of CANA, Cremation Association, and we're a trade association with 3,500 members, ranging from funeral homes, cemeteries, crematories, suppliers, students, consultants, the common denominator being cremation. That's what we focus on and what we like to talk about.
Cool. Very good. And so cremation, obviously, in COVID times, especially, has taken a massive increase. And I feel like you and I sort of we definitely think a lot alike about the same things. We've joked about sort of doing this podcast for a while. We like cremation is on the rise. I mean, we're running out of burial space the world over. We all know that. The general public maybe doesn't know that, but we all know that. But then with COVID and obviously certain restrictions and stuff and people not being able to have funerals, cremation seemed to just increase. Do you think that took a huge step and it'll now peter out, or do you think it'll just keep climbing and climbing?
Well, I do think cremation rates are going to continue to grow. And interestingly, in 2020 and 2021, the two primary, years for COVID deaths in the US and Canada, and US and Canada statistics are what CANA most tracks, but I think this is true internationally. Um, Fascinating is the percentage of cremations grew predictably. As I talk to my members, they're like, oh my gosh, my cremation rate is 3 times, 4 times what it was. Well, and I believe them, they're right,
Yeah.
because the sheer numbers of cremations increased so dramatically. So as far as COVID driving some exponential or stair step increase in cremations overall, we didn't see that. It was 1.5% increase year over year, but the total number of deaths was so much bigger. And so we, in 2020, it was just shy of 2 million cremations in the United States. The final numbers for 2021 aren't in yet. We're starting that data collection now, but the preliminary numbers were closer to 2 million cremations. I expect we'll hit 2 million in 2021. And that's incredible. That's hundreds of thousands more than 2019. So even though I'm cautious about, oh yeah, cremation rates grow predictably and all that. No, the experience is that hundreds of thousands of people in the US experienced cremation probably for the first time or the first time in a long time, and in circumstances you described, without the ability to have services. Uh, some of our members reported, especially on the East Coast in the early months of COVID, they would get a call at the cemetery. What can you do first, cremation or burial? Family didn't care. They just
Yeah.
didn't like their
Wow.
loved one in a refrigerated truck or at
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
What can happen faster? They were making decisions under circumstances that I hope we never experience again, right?
Right. I
Yeah.
know. That's crazy. I never knew that.
Yeah.
That's a horrible position that the families were in. I mean, I know there was so much atrocities that kind of went on, but to think that somebody had, lost somebody and then having to say something like that. I mean, that's brutal.
Hmm. Yeah,
Because I
exactly.
know, yeah, in my memorial business, we found that a lot of people got somebody cremated and then are having the service later. Memorials in the
Mhm.
last year and stuff have increased for us, where the urn is present and but they're having it sort of a year or 2 years after the person passed away. Whereas with burial, while you can still absolutely have a service, and if you haven't done something, I would recommend it, not for my own gains, but from a, I, it's interesting when I started my journey, and sort of this idea of a memorial service that's similar, that is a funeral, but it's not a funeral, and stuff. People used to think, oh, it was just throwing a party, and this life celebration quote got thrown around so much, and people would say, oh, you're just dancing on graves, or you just want a party and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's not what it is at all. Like, I 150 million% believe in the funeral, the blueprint of that as being something where everyone gathers and grieving can begin if it hasn't already, and just that safe space for everybody, and creating that just
Mhm.
lovely warm environment. And there's such a fine line between it being a celebration of life and mourning a loss, and we were actually only talking about it at a memorial at the weekend. It's you can throw a party, of course you can, if that's what, but I feel like that just sort of cushions it's like we're ignoring the grief, we're ignoring the loss, we're ignoring the person has passed away. And I think we have to address that. So I think whether somebody in COVID got cremated or buried, I feel like having some sort of a service, even if it's for 10 people in your home, something, just something. It's a funeral is just so 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 important, I think. So
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think there's, language matters, obviously,
mm.
and whether it's funerals, celebration of life, or, dinner,
Yeah, exactly.
whatever it is, I think we as humans, it's our impulse to gather, to comfort each other, to celebrate together. It's not, it's not typical to have solo, markings of rites of passage kind of thing. And so,
Yeah,
COVID interrupted that. Sometimes it could be, I went to more kind of online funerals, including family as far flung as the Philippines, during COVID. I don't think they would have live streamed it otherwise, right? If
yeah.
it hadn't been COVID. And I'm so grateful because this was a distant relative and I could participate, and I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have flown to the Philippines even had I
Mhm,
could at that point. So there's, there's an accessibility aspect that technology
mhm.
brings us to gather. And I have to say, I think the favorite part of that there, I mean, that the whole service was great, but there was this time between the mass and driving to the cemetery where my cousin-in-law, is he had a driver, but he was filming downtown, the downtown of the small town where most of the relatives had grown up or visited frequently in their childhood. And the Zoom chat went nuts. It was like, oh my gosh, so and so's, like, I see them on the street. There they are. There's so and so. And oh, that cafe's still open. I'm glad it survived COVID. And like all of this, like,
Wow.
reminiscing about their town. And of course there were family memories shared and stuff
Mm,
during the ceremony and during the burial time. But I mean, that experience was all of it. It was tears
mhm,
during the mass. It was
mm.
when the casket closed, it was I mean, literally wailing on Zoom. Then this family reunion, virtual family reunion, and then at the cemetery, more sharing of memories and experiences and asking
Yes.
after people. And it was, so it was the whole range of experience. That's a very specific example, but I think whatever the impulse is, whatever we call it, you know, um, we do something to mark these rites of passage. And CANA research has validated that too. A few years ago, for example, we did some focus group research. And if you've ever participated in focus group research, you hire somebody to populate the focus groups, but you got to tell them who you want. So we told them income and age and gender and all these things. And then we said, we want two groups. We want a direct cremation group and a cremation with service group. Okay. And they said, okay, fine. What does that mean? And we screwed up. We made our first mistake in the research. And we said, direct cremation means people who chose cremation and did nothing. And cremation with service means people who chose cremation and then had a funeral celebration of life, fill in the blank. They came back to us and said, we can't populate the first group. Out of our tens of thousands of people in our database, we can't find anybody. We can find thousands of people who arranged cremations, but no one who did nothing. No one. And the mistake was, what we meant was, did nothing with the funeral provider, with the cremation provider's involvement or assistance. They could have done something on their own. So once we changed that, then we could populate both groups. But I'm here to tell you, the research, I'm sitting on the other side of the glass during these focus groups, and I can't tell who's the direct cremation group versus the cremation with service group. As they talked about their cremation experience, they were the same. Not that it didn't matter if a funeral director was involved, of course it did. Um, However, how, by and large, their experiences were similar, whether they DIY'd their services or not. So the importance, this is all by way of validating your statement. The importance of this is
It,
critical.
yeah, it really is. That's really fascinating to hear. Because I often, in my dealings with funeral homes, it's kind of one of the things I'm saying. I'm like, families are either going to do something with you or they're going to do something without you, most likely. I mean, and you've the evidence to prove it, but this was just like that it's a fact because, as you said, it's our human nature to gather. There's actually a book sitting on my January to read list, book about the art of gathering, and I can't wait to get into it. Because I think it's so important to gather in these times, and whether it's through a funeral home, through your local church, through an event planner, through just gathering your mum's bingo ladies together or
Yeah,
whatever it might be. It's just having those sacred moments. It really is, it's so precious. And so it's great to hear that it's actually factually backed up with a
it
focus group.
is. As an aside, is that book by, what's her name, Priya Parker?
Yes, that's her. Yeah.
Excellent book. And she had a short-lived podcast at the beginning. It started right before the pandemic, but shockingly, in the early months of the pandemic, it ended because we weren't gathering. So
Oh,
it's still out there. I think it was a New York Times podcast, so it's worth looking
I
for.
must.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually, how I came across her book was at an American Express business convention or something, and
Mhm.
of course, they were kind of handing out a free book, and you had a selection, I think, of five, and of course, I walked up and I just immediately see, well, the cover is gorgeous with colors and rainbows, so that kind of was eye catching, but it was about gathering, and I was like, that's the one for me. Like there was other ones about like 10x your business and like sales strategies. Da, 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 da. I'm like, no, that one's mine. Um, and so it's been sitting there now, I will say, for 2 months. So I'm doing detox and feel good January. So I'm hoping to have a bit more downtime now that everyone's sort of dry January and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So I actually have follow her on Instagram, or I started following, I think, when I got the book. And her posts are fantastic. So she's definitely a woman after my own heart. So maybe I'll get her on this podcast actually.
That would be
There you
wonderful. I'd
go. There
listen.
you
I'm
go.
a fan. So
Yeah, there you go. That could actually be good. Um, so yeah, so I mean, yeah, the gathering together and the funeral and memorials and stuff. And I do think a little bit, don't hate me, any funeral directors that are hearing this, but I do think that's where the funeral directors and funeral homes are losing it a little bit. It losing it, as in they're kind of giving out that people don't want them, they don't want this and they don't want that, and it's sort of a negative vibe. And I actually feel like families they want more things, but it's things that they value. So whether it's live streaming, whether it's a gathering without a priest, like people are changing, we're evolving. And I think if funeral homes, if they say stay stagnant and antiquated, they are going to lose, they are going to become what they fear most, which is just become disposal houses, as cruel as that sounds. Like
mhm.
that's what's going to happen unless they open their eyeballs and see what's actually out there. I mean, I feel like I am a prime candidate for telling them that. And it's not because of who I work with and where I am and stuff. Like I started what I'm doing back home in Ireland, in Little Ireland, 15 years ago. I still consult with families back home in Ireland. And yes, like I work with a notable funeral home here in New York, and I work with, some families that are well off. But it's what I've actually tried to explain to some of them, and they digest it, is that okay, you might have, family one and family two, and family one might be super, super wealthy and have, massive disposable income, and family two might not have anything. you can still create an incredible memorial and profitable for the funeral home, because it is a business and everything like that, as am I. You can still do all of that and provide people with an incredible service, as long as they value it and as long as you're giving them what they value. So, like, for example, family one might value having wait staff. That might be super important to them, and they just want to
Mhm.
feel like everything's taken care of. Family two might want to do everything themselves, but they need somebody to just guide them, to give them a to-do list, to overlook everything. And
Yep.
I've worked with all different types of families, and I'll be completely honest, sometimes the profit can be the same in both. It just wildly depends. And it's, I know it's a bit of a sensitive subject for funeral homes, but with the increase of cremation, direct cremation, I feel like showing your value as a member of the community and as the person that people can turn to in their time of need, I think is where, I think me and Larry have even joked about this, and our good friend Larry, who's previously been on, actually we had to break Larry's episode up into 3 podcasts, of course, because it's Larry and we were
Of
chatting.
course.
Of course. But even he said, that it really should be, there should be a line item, which is your consultant fees, as opposed to, marking up on caskets and things like that. And I think I completely agree with him. I think that's the way forward.
Oh, I
So,
couldn't agree more, because I think where cremation is perceived or experienced as a threat to funeral business, a threat to profitability, let's be clear, a business
yeah.
threat, um, to funeral providers, is because their business model has not adjusted and moved away from merchandise. Casket markups is the most common.
Hmm.
And it's just so fascinating, because the funeral rule is under review, and the whole point of the funeral rule was to itemize and move away from packages. But I really believe that the funeral rule inadvertently created a package, which is called direct cremation, which the concept didn't exist before the funeral rule was implemented in 1984. And it really didn't exist anywhere else in the world, and still is unique to the United States. We were exporting it, perhaps, this concept of direct disposition only. You can, then whatever the grieving family wants to do, they can do. But it's created the concept. We get calls all the time at CANA from consumers who are like, unclear. Why does the cremation price say $995, but I ended up paying $2,500 or something? And the answer is because direct cremation is really at least four, if not five components, right? It's the cremation, but it's also transportation of the deceased from place of death to the crematory. It's administrative, getting death certificates, all paperwork, all of that stuff. It's refrigerated, secure storage, and then it's returning cremated remains, and then any services on top of that. And because the way the funeral rule has been interpreted, implemented, understood by all parties, yeah, it's misleading in a way. And so this funeral rule review is supposed to be, I think is addressing some of those issues. But it's a shame to me, and I am speaking from a consumer perspective, because I'm not a funeral professional. I'm an association executive. I was hired to run an association that happens to focus on cremation. And I think I do that well, but I've also learned a lot about cremation. But I still kind of come more from a consumer perspective. I'm like, if I'm hiring an expert, I want expertise, right?
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily, I want good value, of course, and I want what I want. And I may not know what I want until I see all the options. But give me all the options, right? Help me, guide me through this major purchase, this heightened, highly emotional situation, and so that I can feel like I got good value, but I also had, or at least a good start to my grieving experience through all of this. And this focus on price and get it done and minimalism may work well for some, but I think doesn't work well for the majority. So
Yeah.
that's my
Yeah. I agree with you. I think there are, like, as I'm constantly saying, there's, every one of us is unique. We're very, very different, each of us, and we all want different things. And there will be those that want the minimal of everything, and they're, that's their choice, and that should be, they should be allowed to do that. I do think a lot of consumers in my experience and from listening to different podcasts and stuff like that, I think in my experience, a lot of a lot of consumers get sticker shock. And I used to work in the wedding business, and so the difference is vast, because a wedding is something you're planning for. It's something you're preparing for. Maybe a year, maybe even 2 years, even regardless, you're at least usually preparing a month or so, and you're saving towards it. When somebody dies, your whole world falls apart. You're
Right.
and even if it's somebody removed from you, there's still like, oh my god, that person's gone, oh my god. And then you're presented with fee, okay, price, now you have to pay for this, and people are like, what is happening? They feel like they're being robbed a second time. And that's, if they feel like that, unless you can make them not feel like that and
Mhm.
show your value and show, you know what you bring to the table. And it's not just, and again, I'm so on the side of the funeral profession, because it gets such a rough time in the media. And I think that's what the difficulty is, that people come to a funeral home, they've already suffered this massive loss, and they're coming in and they're thinking, this is going to be somebody who just wants to take my last pennies, and this is somebody who just wants to, I've been robbed of so much, and now this person is going to like take the last bit. And that's, honestly, that's not true. And during COVID, I mean, I talked about this about on another podcast. I wish I was licensed, because I could have helped my friends and my colleagues.
Right. Yeah.
That was really heartbreaking for me, and I'm sure for you, Barbara, it's,
Mhm.
we're not licensed, and I've no intention of getting licensed. But during COVID, it was so hard to sit back and watch them work tirelessly 24/7, helping all these families. And though those sort of stories are not shown in the media, those sort of incredible hero stories, yes, absolutely, were there heroes in the hospitals? There 100% were. But there were heroes outside the back of the hospitals, taking our loved ones after they passed away into their care. And actually, there's a famous funeral director, Caleb Wilde.
Mhm.
He put a post on Instagram. I believe he's stepped back from funeral directing now, actually.
Mm.
But he, for his mental health, I believe, which, fair play to him. But he put a post which I thought was really interesting, and it was kind of a bit how we cleanse the idea of death from society. Because he said, you go in the front door of a hospital, help, needing help, but you come out the back door when you've passed away.
Yeah.
And the funeral director has to come in the back, often beside, as he said in the post, beside the trash cans and everything else. Like, how horrendous, really. And I'd actually never even thought about that. And I just thought, wow, that's actually wild to think that happens so often. And again, I'm just, I'm digressing a little bit, but it was just watching my friends and colleagues go through that during COVID. And, they were never given any praise or any,
Mhm.
not that they do it for this, but any like free coffee in Starbucks and all of these little things that were given to the nurses and the doctors that absolutely deserved it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to take from the rich to give to the poor or anything, but I just felt like, we're kind of, not we, because I wasn't one of them, but they're like the masked crusaders that just float around in the middle of the night. And, it's really heartbreaking. And so it's showing that value when you've got, I went on a bit of a tangent there, but it's showing the value when, when you're sitting in front of that family. And if, sometimes it's a hard conversation I've had with some funeral directors. I'm like, if they don't see the value, then they don't see the value, and they probably never will. And,
No,
you know,
but going back to your tangent for just a second, I'm so glad. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I'm so glad you expressed that, because the COVID for me, the pandemic, the 2020 for sure, was this weird thing that, just like you, I'm not licensed. I was working at my dining room table for the most part. Meanwhile, I'm married to a nurse practitioner who was working in nursing homes. A quarter of her patients died within, a short period of time. Um, and she's swathed in plastic at work and coming home, and
mm,
there's thank you essential workers everywhere. Chicago didn't have, had different traditions than New York. There was no banging of pans, but there were yard signs and different things like that. And I never once saw a inclusion of funeral
mm,
directors, certainly not crematory operators or cemeterians, in that list of essential workers. And one of the things I was doing on behalf of members was kind of, public policy and lobbying kinds of things. And it wasn't just a lack of thank you. I definitely think that, and the funeral professionals listening to this podcast can agree or disagree that they're kind of accustomed to being unsung heroes, and they're perfectly
Yeah.
fine for the most part being in the background. And, and frankly, most, uh, I was like this as a consumer before I came to CANA. Like, there's a lot I didn't know about what goes on with death and who's taking care of our dead. And I don't mind knowing now, but wow, am I grateful to them that they're handling this. And one of those things you don't need to know, right? You don't
Yeah.
need to know because it's done. It's
Mhm.
handled, and there's an infrastructure for it, and that's fantastic. But that infrastructure was stretched. And then, I guess what was disconcerting is even when vaccines started becoming available, and given maybe they were unsung heroes, but they were left off the list in many states
Yeah.
to even have access to early access to vaccines.
Yeah.
And anyway, it was just I never felt as essential, I guess, as an association executive as I did during that time period, to be able to lobby and speak on behalf of my members
Yeah.
who couldn't do it individually because they were so in the weeds caring for the dead day to
Mhm.
day, caring for themselves, caring for their families. Yeah, and I think we're still talking about it now in 2023 because we're still feeling the impact of that. And I think I'm so grateful. One of the outcomes, if there's any positive thing that comes out of a pandemic, is that we talk about mental health more openly and the need for peer support. And when I just want to throw in a blatant promotion for a wonderful organization called Funeral Professionals Peer Support. They're working on a new website. They're between websites right now, but you can go to the CANA website, cremationassociation.org/peer support. And we have monthly drop-in meetings via Zoom. You can be anywhere in the world. We have participants from all over North America, even Kenya, Europe, drop in, and sometimes people just listen. We always have a facilitator, but it's a space where you can ask a question, seek support, quietly absorb the support.
Yeah.
I staff it, and I swear about 10 minutes in, I can feel my pulse and blood pressure going down. At the
Wow.
end of it, I'm just like, wow, I'm so blessed to be in this group. And even if it's just comforting knowing that there's a group like that, should you ever need it, but every funeral professional, including you, Jennifer, are welcome. That's a broad category of funeral professionals. So,
That's
but we have to recognize that we have to be there
yeah.
for each other. Yeah.
That's amazing, and I'm glad actually you mentioned that. We love a bit of blatant promotion, so that's fine. No, I'm glad you mentioned that because I actually heard them on a podcast last year, and they're on my to do list to get as a guest. I
Oh,
think I might have reached out. I think I might have reached out at some point, but usually I have to follow. Usually, if it. Even with my own email inbox, if it's not essential, it gets it gets kind of shoved down to the bottom. So, um, yes, because I thought it was just a fascinating conversation. Like, I mean, what we're touching on it here, and I just think it's so, so, so important. I mean, mental health is massively important. But I think in things like the hospitals and nursing homes and funeral homes and just where you're dealing with, and thank you for saying it to me because while uh I am very a problem shared is a problem halved, and my mother always said I
yes.
talk too much, hence a podcast. But I'm very sort of an open book. But I also, struggle. We all struggle with demons. We'll call them for, at whatever. I mean, COVID was a very dark time for me. I was living on my own in a basement, a million miles away from my family in Ireland. I had no family here. I went through a bit of a breakup, and there was a few friends. There was just some shit, we'll say, went down, and yeah, it was a very, very dark time for me. But I also, which is why I think I kind of appreciate mental health and what people do for it, because I've only really experienced that sort of depression. I don't even know, because that's the thing about mental health. Like, you're only these words are thrown out there, and I don't know if that's what it was. I don't know. Was it? I don't know. But I've only experienced it twice in my life, and I know, interestingly, that I said to myself, I love it. I love an L conversation with myself, but I said to myself, Jen, this is shit. this is absolutely shit that you're going through this. But it's okay. Do whatever you've got to do. Cry, grieve, watch sad movies, have a few drinks. And I'm not saying works for everyone else. This is just me.
Mhm.
Eat whatever food you want. Do whatever you've got to do. We're giving you 1 month. This is me talking to myself. We're giving you 1 month, and then you've got to shake it off. Then you can do it for a month, and sometimes I might even. It's rare that twice this has only really seriously happened, but I've said do whatever you've got to do for a month, then shake it off, and it doesn't mean you ever forget. It doesn't mean you sort of just wake up that after that month and you're great. But I just found giving myself the freedom and the not, because I find that half of the issue with, for me, getting down on myself is actually the shame then that comes with it. So if I get down on myself, then I feel guilty for being down on myself when my life is so great. Then I feel shame because I'm being guilty, or I should have done this and I didn't do that. And then it just becomes a blah, blah, blah. So
Right.
I found
Right.
stepping back and sort of saying, no, it's okay. Stay in bed, cry, do this, do that, X, Y, and Z. But there is a timeline to this. That I found has helped me. And even when I go through tiny little dips of emotions, not nearly like those two experiences, but like, when I have just a down day where, I have a business and sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not. And we all go through it, and the Oprah Winfreys of the world and the most successful
Yeah.
people in the world, they go through it. And I love that they're all talking about it. And so, yeah, for me, it's very much about taking away the guilt and the shame. And from, as an Irish person as well, there's a lot of that on us. We wear guilt and shame, and you know, I'm not saying, I'm not giving advice. We're just chatting here. This is
Well, and
not
don't you think because you got through your dark period, for lack of a better word, the first time you knew when you were experiencing it, the second time that you could get through it, right?
yeah,
Like there's experience that builds, and I think that's I mean, that's why teen years are so angsty, right? Because you're all you're feeling all the feels, and you don't
yeah,
have the coping skills. But once you have the coping skills, that's great. And I think what COVID, brought to the light is how how weak so many of our systems are. I mean, fill in the blank, but I'm just going to say I'm going to stay focused on mental health, and some of it is our coping skills. I mean, I'll confess, I was never a dog owner before COVID. Adopted two geriatric pooches during COVID. They're sleeping at my feet right now, and my mental health has never been better because they're just pure love. And I mean, they're dogs, so they're pure love and
yeah.
unconditional love, and I have to care for them. And
Mm,
when I'm caring for them, I'm not focused on my own woes, or it helps
yeah.
me put it in perspective. And I have other coping mechanisms too, but I think that advice is so key. And I'm going to take that, like, okay, if I can set a time limit for spinning out, I will
Well,
do it and then move on, right? Walk
it's
the dogs.
yeah, well, that's it. And it's funny, I have actually said it to obviously a lot of the families I work with. We become very, very close, and I'm very, privileged in that sense. But some of them then will confide in me, and I become part therapist. And that's something that I don't necessarily give it as advice. I'm just saying, this worked for me. And sometimes you need to, because like when you lose somebody, oh, I still have to look after the kids. I still have to go to work tomorrow. This project needs taken care of. Da, 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 da. And everything just becomes, and for me, that's where the problem is, because you get overwhelmed,
Yeah.
and then it's like crash. Whereas, sometimes when I'm chatting with this family, I'm like, it's okay for you to sleep in 3 days next week. It's okay for you to take a U day. I know it sounds wild to take a spa day when your husband maybe has just died, but like, it's not about a spa. It's like, it's literally sitting in it, crying your eyes out, laughing at the memories, whatever it can be. It's grief is, and talking about dogs, my TED talk was about this. It's grief is different for everyone. I don't have a partner, I'm not married, I don't have kids, I don't have a dog over here, but I do have a dog in Ireland. But losing a job, losing a friend, losing whatever could hit me just as hard as the next person who loses a spouse.
Yeah.
And it's not for me or any of us to judge anybody on what that particular loss you suffered meant to you. It's not. When we lost our dog, she was 16, we put her down. And I use the word lost, and I actually often talk about it. It's not like you lose like a necklace, then you
Yeah.
find it again, unfortunately. But um, we put our dog down, and it still gets me, it still chokes me up. And because, like that, Barbara, I, as a teenager, I had her. And I do think that was a savior, because I was able to tell her anything, and she would just, all good, snuggle up, all
Yeah.
good. Are we going for walks? We're going for walks. Great, we're going for walks.
Kisses.
Like, you
Yeah,
could
kisses.
you could have told her, I could have told her I was Hitler,
Right.
and she still would have been like, cool. All right, we still going for that. We still going for that walk.
Yeah, belly scratch and then let's go. No,
Yeah.
yes, I completely get you. One thing I wanted to say too, related to something we were discussing earlier, I think your career path is so interesting. You mentioned that we typically cross paths at professional conventions, and it's true. And we will have brief but
Yep.
insightful, memorable conversations in the aisles among display booths selling who knows
Yeah.
what, right?
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. So I'm glad we're having a more focused, lengthy conversation now.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever said this to you, so I'll take the opportunity. I think your career path is so interesting, starting as event planner and then going in to the death care world. And I think for funeral professionals who can't are struggling with figuring out cremation profitability and the business plan, you know what? A great entry point is for all of them, more blatant promotion, is a celebrant. Because let me just say that I love all my CANA members, and many, my background is actually as a librarian, and I thought before I took this job that librarians were a profession that was hit with like massive change, right? The internet changed everything for libraries, especially reference, which was my focus. But then I came to work for CANA, very different from librarians, but technology is changing everything. Consumer preferences are changing, new forms of disposition and guess what? A funeral director has to do it all. It's always both and. Nothing ever gets dropped. There's still going to
Mhm.
be burying. There's still going to be embalming, as well as whatever this new form of disposition is that a family comes and asks about. And sometimes it's the same family, right? They're planning the embalmed, casketed visitation, burial for implementing the pre-planned whatever for their grandparent, and then saying, yeah, I don't want that, what's next around the corner, or do you offer this thing that I read about in the paper? And it's like, whoo, whiplash, right? They
Yeah.
have to know so much and serve a wide variety of consumer preferences. No wonder it's challenging, and it's challenging to figure out how to fit all of that into an existing business. But the ones that I admire so much and who are figuring that out they go to professional events, they're curious, how do we do this? The breaks are probably more important than the sessions to them, because they pick out that person who asked a question similar to the one they had and put their heads together and come up with some ideas, and trial and error. They'll find a celebrant, they'll bring them in. They know I'm an embalmer, not an event planner, and I'm cool with that identity. So let me find an event planner or somebody who can more emotionally connect with the families, perhaps, and craft a truly unique service. And this is where, my comfort zone. So I will, do that. So I think that's one way to get to that, expand that
Absolutely.
business plan, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And exactly what you just said there. I feel like a lot of them, they're coming from a place of fear. Oh, event planners are going to take my job, or the celebrant. Oh, if I don't go to the priest, they're coming from fear based. I
Yeah.
think actually it was back in like 2016, back when I was working with Eco Legacy,
Hmm.
and I think that's how you and I actually
I
connected.
think so.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I was speaking with a lady, a journalist from the New York Times, and it was at, I think, the NFDA or one of them. Anyway, she was interviewing people on the ground floor, and I asked her, I said, what was your one takeaway? And she said, really interestingly, she said, my one takeaway was every funeral director down there thinks that they're going to become disposal houses, and that event planners and all of these other people are coming for their jobs. And I was like, what? That's like, to me, that's wild, because I mean, as far as I'm aware, in the United States, I think the only one doing what I do. I know there's a lady up in Canada. I think there maybe is two up in Canada. But regardless, I'm not saying that as in I don't definitively know that. I just know from who I network with. And so I'm like, no, event planners, to be honest, because I used to be, they don't, this is the dark side. They don't want to be here. Like they're doing weddings and baby showers, they're happy out. So I'm kind of like, no, it's not stop coming from a place of fear, because they can help you, absolutely, like your local event planner or whatever it is, work with them. You guys can create a new business line, like it happens. And it's quite frustrating to me, because like that, from a celebrant point of view, like when I go in and I'm talking to a family, like I'm talking to one now shortly after this, is I'll say to them, are you getting it live streamed? Have you, what flowers are you going with? Like I'll ask them all those things because I have an interest. And lo and behold, an awful lot of the time, like with this particular one, I'll upsell, it sounds awful to say that, but I'll upsell a live streaming service, and the funeral home be delighted. And I'm like, but why didn't somebody offer them that, you know?
You know, I think that's quite literally the $1 million or some dollar amount question is, but that's what's hard too, because one thing I really sympathize, we do obviously Cremation Association, we do a lot of training around cremation. And one of the things that cremation as a disposition offers families is this expanded timeline, an expanded timeline for services, expanded timeline for permanent placement, and possibly and this is common in my family, multiple services. So
Mhm.
the story I love to tell about my family tradition is we had a really bad year, and I'm thinking it was like around 2016, where we had multiple deaths in one year on one branch of the family. A couple were expected, a couple were unexpected, and that branch of the family all chose cremation. And they were in the deaths were in 3 states. The four deaths, three states. And so what happened is when the death immediately happened, the closest relatives like came together. There was maybe it was just a dinner, but it was, but anyway, maybe it was a local memorial service, something small, depending on the circumstances. But then we had this family gathering in Denver over the summer, better weather. And it happened to be the cover for this event was also my mother's 70th birthday. And my mother was an identical twin. So it was her, she and her sister came together. We had this picnic in the state park. The cover was the 70th birthday, 2 birthday cakes. But what we were really going to do is scatter ashes. Okay. Completely illegally. Everybody knew it was illegal, including me. I'm confessing. But this is where this branch of the family scattered their loved ones, because they'd had some deaths earlier and they scattered. So we gather under this picnic enclosure. My local cousin had reserved it and everything. And he's looking around the park. And he's like, "Where's the playground? Where's this, that, and the other thing?" There was only this picnic enclosure, and apparently there'd been a playground, and there's the trailhead over there, and beautiful park overlooking this mountainous area, gorgeous. He loved to do that hike. And so we've just scattered. We've come back to eat birthday cake, and the park ranger shows up. Good timing, since we just scattered, right? And he's chatting with the park ranger, and, "Oh, what brings you together?" And my mom pipes out, "Oh, we're celebrating my birthday. You want a piece of cake?" And he said no. And so my cousin asked him, "What's going on with the park? You took out the playground. He's like, "Yeah, the bathrooms are going next. We sold all this land over here to developers, and we're going to keep the trailhead, which is the sliver of parking lot and access to the trail, and it's going to become like a porta potty kind of thing, and this picnic enclosure is going to go away." And yeah, that's happening over the next year. We just sold the land, so we're scaling back. And he was like, "Oh, okay." And the park ranger moves on, and he whips around and says to my family, "How can they do that? This is where we scatter our dead. How outraged? How can we do that?" And
This is our little memorial garden.
this is, and it's going to be someone's backyard. And yes,
Oh
it
my
is.
God.
It is someone's backyard now, and I won't name the park in case like
It's,
somebody's
yeah,
looking. But it was all I could do to say, and actually the cousins who are my generation, we all turned to each other and like, well, I guess we could have picked a cemetery, couldn't we? But oh well. And it was what it was. But I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like, okay, there's themes in there, DIY. I'm not going to ask permission. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to be
mm,
outraged when I don't get what I want, when I've
yeah,
broken the rules. There's a lot of stuff like that, and some guidance
yeah.
from a funeral professional early on would have been helpful, perhaps.
Would have been helpful, and that's exactly it. Like that's really and truly all that people are looking for is just a hand to hold to
Hmm.
guide them through just the shittiest of times. Like, let's be honest, you can't call it kind of anything else.
Yeah.
Um, you know, like actually, although a friend of mine said something to me the other day, and I thought it was quite interesting. It's a little bit off topic, but it just came to me, and I just um there's obviously across every country and even in New York and every city and everything, there's wealthy areas and then there's sort of impoverished areas. And I just thought this was really interesting. He said to me, for the wealthy, death is an inconvenience. For the poor, it's a burden. I
Oh,
thought that
well
was
said.
really and interesting, kind of tragic on both sides.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting because it's it's as you know, as we kind of started off this podcast with, it's money that you didn't save for, unless you've got a pre-plan and all that sort of stuff. But
Hmm.
it's sticker shock sometimes for a lot of people, and especially if it's your first and you happen to be very young or whatever it might be. I mean, it's but there are associations like you guys out there that are protecting sort of the consumer and the funeral profession as well. And it's great to see. I mean, we had Jack, who's the president of the NFDA, on there a
Hmm.
couple of weeks ago. And it's great for me anyway. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've been over and back to all these association annual conventions and stuff, and it's predominantly why I moved over here eventually 8 years ago, which I can't believe it's 8 years now.
Wow. Yeah.
No, crazy, crazy, crazy. But it's seeing, younger, not even necessarily younger, but seeing people with more open minds are taking the helm now
Yeah.
and are like the directors and the presidents of these associations. And that to me, that's something I'm delighted to see. And I kept kind of egging Jack on, obviously, because I'm a celebrant. And I said to him, I said, it doesn't have to be me, but I kept egging him on that the service of remembrance this year should be led by a celebrant, because I can't kind of believe that it's still being led by, specific religion, and that. So yeah, look, there's a lot of change coming.
Hmm.
And as you and I, we didn't get into it, but we are going to have to unfortunately wrap it up. So maybe we'll get you back on again. But we definitely, there's a lot happening in the future with green disposition.
Yeah.
There's the potentially a first non-profit funeral home. I was a friend of mine, Melissa. I'm sure you probably know about that. Yeah. And then obviously this composting thing just got legalized here in New York, so that's huge.
Yeah.
So all very exciting times.
Well, and these
So
are areas where CANA is the smallest of the national associations, and we've
yeah.
really stayed in our lane, which has been cremation. But now that we're changing our name, but all of these new forms of disposition are similar, different from, but similar to cremation in that they reduce human remains faster than
Mhm.
burial, right? So they have many things in common. There's machinery in use that takes place at a facility. And so, for all those reasons, CANA has taken an interest in those new forms of disposition. And I believe, at least at this point, is the only national association, possibly the only death care association, actively talking about these new forms of disposition. Because, back to the business model, some death care professionals say, "Well, it's not even legal in my state. I don't want to hear about it." It
Yeah.
is it really a thing? I mean, is alkaline hydrolysis even 1% of cremations in the United States? The answer is no. So it's not something they're gonna. It's not a big enough business opportunity for them yet, they
Hmm.
think, to pay
Yeah.
attention to. And yet, like you said, there's all these new and really interesting business models that are forming. I always focus on the business side of things, so pardon me, but they're not, and they're effective and successful, even though these new forms of disposition are just kind of evolving And there's an energy around composting that I
Mm.
haven't seen. Maybe there was a similar kind of, pardon the religious language, but evangelical like excitement. And, even within my family, people have you heard about this composting thing? It's really fascinating. And I'm like, whoa. you know, Maybe there
Yeah,
was some of that about cremation 100 years ago when it was just becoming a thing, but there's a different energy around it.
I agree.
I think
Yeah.
it's something to watch. And the fact that it's coming into place in New York, and there was a couple cemeteries already making statements saying we're going to do it as soon as we
Really?
can. So now
Great.
it's pressure back to the regulators to write the rules. It's coming. The
That's
reality of composting is coming, not just
that's that's great.
you. So
Yeah, because
yeah,
that's
let's talk about that another time.
yes, I was about to say I think we'll need to have a whole other one on green burials and dispositions and all of that sort of stuff because we kind of went off on our tangent, but it's good. I'm glad we
Yeah,
covered what we did.
me too.
So thank you so much for being with us, Barbara. And we'll definitely get you back on for another. We maybe even might make it a trio. We might like bring you
Oh,
on and somebody else from the green, and we can have a little. Yeah, we don't
ooh,
do
yeah.
many trios here, but
Let me think about that would be great.
yeah,
Have you ever interviewed Tanya Marsh?
I
Do you
have
know
not.
Tanya? Well, and I made a note to introduce you to Michael Dixon and Lisa Smith from Funeral Professional Peer Support Team.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you.
I'll write down Tanya. Tanya's a law professor at Wake Forest University, and specializing in cemetery law. And she wrote the first draft of the law that evolved into legalizing NOR in Washington State. And
Amazing.
she's been involved in with Better Land Forests and that nonprofit organization. And I believe she had something to do. I don't know the details with advising on the law that passed in New York and Vermont. So
Amazing.
she comes kind of from the legal regulatory perspective, but she
Good, you
speaks in
need them
plain
too.
English. Yeah, she's very accessible. She had her own podcast for a while called Death at Sec, ETSEQ. So if you want to check
Oh,
her out, you can.
cool. Yeah. There's actually a lot more podcasts than I think I realized. I'm not it's terrible to admit this, but I'm not actually a massive podcast listener.
Ah,
I'm more of I know, which is ridiculous, but I'm more because I like to watch things and I'm a visual person.
yeah,
Like when I'm listening to things, if it's not an audio book or something, like and it has to be it has to be a fiction, no, a non-fiction audio book, or music. That's kind of the only, and even
yeah.
the audio books, it's only certain times I can't. Yeah, and that's only of a recent revelation. I haven't been doing that a long time either. Um, but thank you so much for coming
Yeah.
on, and we will definitely be in touch soon. And we'll set that up with Tanya maybe. And yeah, we're good. What did you think of that episode? I'm sure people have a lot of opinions. Mental health is a huge, huge, huge thing right now. But if you have a comment or a thought or question about that or anything else covered in today's episode, please do send us an email, glamreaperpodcast@gmail.com. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.